Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Kyiv residents take shelter in subway station amidst air raid alerts caused by Russia's attacks across Ukraine. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko launches investigation after 2 women and a child die outside locked shelter. Plus, injuries and damage in Russia's Belgorod region after shelling blamed on Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin inside Ukraine. Residents of Kyiv are taking shelter in a subway as Russian attacks cause air raid alerts across the country that were later lifted. Footage shows people sleeping on the floors and benches of a Kyiv subway station. They were also seen pitching tents in corridors. Ukrainian authorities lifted air raid alerts across most of the nation, and officials in the capital city said defenses appeared to have shot down some 30 missiles and drones fired by Russia. Moscow has launched around 20 separate missiles and drone strikes against Ukrainian cities since the start of May. Witnesses say a 9-year-old Ukrainian girl, her mother, and another woman were killed in a Russian missile strike in Kyiv after the air raid shelter they rushed to had failed to open. Now, the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, expressed frustration at the miscue and said if local officials were unable to provide protection, they could be prosecuted. Police opened a criminal investigation into the 3 deaths near a medical center in the district of Kyiv. Zelensky, in his nightly video message, said shelters must be accessible. He says, in his words, never again shall we see a repeat of that situation that occurred last night in Kyiv. Meanwhile, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, said authorities launched investigations into reportedly the blocked entrance to the bomb shelter at a residential block comprising homes, kindergarten, 2 schools, and a clinic. Russia denies targeting civilians or committing war crimes, but its forces have devastated cities and repeatedly hit residential areas since February the 24th, 2022, the day of the beginning of the invasion.
Prosecutor's office, security services, and police have begun investigation. Conclusions will be drawn. Was the entrance to the bomb shelter closed or not? It is impossible to ascertain now because all the doors were blown away.
We have weeks-long, every day, the Russians send their kamikaze drone and missiles to our hometown, and a lot of people killed, a lot of buildings destroyed. We have a big part of people who have an injury, and yes, of course, people very angry. People very angry. It's not the war; it's genocide against Ukraine, against Ukrainian people from Russia.
The death of the 9-year-old girl killed during the Russian missile attack on Kyiv shocked Ukrainian parents as the country marked Children's Day yesterday. Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries traditionally mark Children's Protection Day on June the 1st, but this year, authorities in Ukraine have cancelled most Children's Day celebrations to mourn the killed child. United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, said in a statement, the war was having a devastating impact on the mental health and well-being of children. The United Nations said in a statement that over 1,500 children had been killed and injured in Ukraine since the start of the war. Footage from Russian media shows the aftermath of the shelling in the town of Shebekino in Russia's Belgorod border region, blamed by local officials on Ukraine. Now, the Belgorod governor says Ukraine's armed forces have repeatedly shelled Shebekino with Soviet-designed Grad 122mm rockets, setting alight a dormitory and damaging an administrative building. He said at least 9 civilians were injured in the shelling across the region, adding that the evacuation of residents to temporary accommodations will resume when the fighting calms down. Gladkov said hundreds of children, women, and the elderly were already leaving the area, adding that he'd given Russian President Vladimir Putin an update on the situation. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says Russia's priority in its border region of Belgorod is to help the residents and support those who need temporary relocation, following 3 attempted cross-border incursions from Ukraine and heavy shelling of the area. Russia's defense ministry said it had repelled 3 cross-border attacks on Thursday near Shebekino, and it accused Ukraine of using what it cast as terrorist formations to carry out attempted attacks on Russian civilians. Ahead of an expected Ukrainian counteroffensive in the 15-month-long military conflict, the Belgorod region, which neighbors Ukraine's Kyiv, has been under heavy shelling in recent days. Last month, a cross-border raid by pro-Ukrainian forces briefly seized several frontier settlements, and earlier this week, the biggest ever drone attack on Moscow. Meanwhile, the Moscow court has set a new date for the hearing, paving the way for another trial of imprisoned Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny that could keep him in prison for decades. The Moscow City Court had initially scheduled a preliminary hearing on Wednesday to discuss technical issues related to the trial of the Kremlin's longtime opponent, but it moved it to next Tuesday without explaining the reason. Mr. Navalny has said that the new extremism charges, which he rejected as absurd, could keep him in prison for another 30 years. The accusations against Navalny comes as Russian authorities are conducting a stepped-up crackdown on dissent amidst Moscow's military action in Ukraine, which Mr. Navalny has harshly criticized. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak during a meeting of the European political community at Mimi Castle in Bolboaca in Moldova. The 2 leaders went for a walk on the castle grounds before entering the castle and sitting down to table to continue their talks ahead of the European summit. The summit of the EU's 27 member states and 20 other European states was being held at a castle just 20 kilometers from Ukrainian territory and near the Russian-backed breakaway Transnistria region of Moldova. Leaders used the occasion as a symbolic show of support for Ukraine and Moldova, while also tackling other issues, including a rise in ethnic tensions in Kosovo and efforts towards lasting peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva reiterated his country's criticism of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but said he's been trying to remain neutral in order to be able to broker potential peace talks. President Lula told reporters after a meeting with Finland's President Sauli Niinisto in Brasilia he was looking to create conditions for both countries to engage in peace negotiations that contributes to the search for a peaceful solution to the conflict. The Finnish president, whose country, Russia's neighbor, joined NATO in March, said he feels that every attempt to reach peace is valuable, but at the moment that is not in sight.
The attack to Ukraine made by Russia is illegal, and we have condemned it in United Nations handlings. I do understand that, or my feeling is that every attempt to reach peace is valuable. But I think that at the moment it is not in sight. Nevertheless, I fully agree that once a fair, justified peace has come, Ukraine has got a justified peace. The peace must be somehow guaranteed. because war always leaves bitter feelings. And to have a sustainable peace, we need the big ones, if I may use this word, to, in a way, guarantee that both respect whatever the peace is. And I think...
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he received a strong show of support from allies attending a summit in Moldova on the question of supplying fighter jets to Kyiv to help repel Russian forces. Now, the Ukrainian leader joined a meeting of European leaders in Moldova, seeking to bolster Western solidarity and keep up pressure for concrete support ahead of his country's expected counteroffensive against Russia's invasion. Addressing leaders at the start of the gathering, Mr. Zelensky asked NATO members to take a clear decision on whether to admit Ukraine and also reiterated calls for Western fighter jets to protect Ukrainian skies after another deadly strike on Kyiv, noting that the F-16 fighter jets he's seeking are supplied by the United States. President Zelensky said after the meeting he had had powerful support from many countries, adding with help of the United States, they could create a coalition. Now let's talk to Ambassador Joseph Ayalugu, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva, joining us virtually from London. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Yes, good morning.
Ambassador, the recent death of the child is just showing again to the world that these casualties will continue to happen. And these children and these people left in Kyiv and Ukraine are those that didn't depart by way of being displaced because of this war. Over 8 million, we also hear that that figure could be as high as 10 million Ukrainians who have fled the country because of the war. Do both sides not have a moral obligation to look for ways, in spite of whoever's ox is gored, to bring this conflict to an end so these sorts of casualties, children and what have you, can stop?
Well, good question. Well, both sides do have, of course, but war is war. And whenever you have a war, then there are casualties. Of course, the recent deaths seem to coincide with the UN Children's Day. But you know that children have been dying since the 15 months of crisis in that country. Children, young adults, and so on. Yes, to respond to the question, there is a moral responsibility. But when you start a war, well, let's put it, these are war casualties, and that's why wars shouldn't start at all. And if they start, there should be every effort to make them end quickly. But that is what it is.
How much of this conflict rests on President Putin's personal feelings on how they were offended by Ukraine's position prior to the war? For a man who keeps reinventing himself, that is President Putin, first as president, then as prime minister, now as president again, I think his term limit is ending in 2024. If he is, has he been able to carry the people along in Russia so that this war, according to them, will continue to be fought until their objectives are met? Or is there, in your view, more widespread approval of President Putin's decisions concerning the conflict?
Well, let's face the reality. The internal system in Russia doesn't allow too much of, popular input. We can't easily say that a lot of Russians approve this, because any voice of dissent does get clobbered. We were just pointing out to the gentleman in prison, and they're still trying to find reasons to extend his tenure for 30 years. So this is largely, my opinion is largely the viewpoint and the responsibility and the reactions of Putin himself. If it was a different person who didn't think that Ukraine should be under the subjugation of Russia and decided to accept that the global trend is to respect territorial integrity and sovereignty of other nations, I'm almost sure that we wouldn't have got this sort of development scenario. But we already know that Putin has this grand idea of imperial Russia. If you are not within Russia, then you are a Russian satellite, and a Russian satellite country would always have to behave as they are told. Incidentally, Ukraine has a different view. Ukraine believes that it has right to determine what way it goes. If it wants to go a democratic, adopt the correct system of internal government, then that's what he wants to do. He wants to go capitalist. That's what he wants to do. So this is actually the conflict, largely centering around the personal opinion of Putin. And of course, with his personal opinion, he gets other people involved, either people who also have that opinion or who have to be coerced into it. But the system of government there doesn't allow interested as a sovereign entity in consonance with the global rule of law, at least guiding relations between countries. That would be the political solution that will end the crisis. Any other thing will probably not suffice because it sends the wrong message across that any large country or powerful country can do the same thing and carve out territories at will. Political settlement is possible, but it's limited to simply that arrangement. And we've been thinking of a possibility that Ukraine would lose certain territories. For instance, Crimea, that is already appears to have totally lost. That will be left with Ukraine to say, okay, let that be part of what they would lose to gain the rest of the country. But we would see how it pans out at the end of the day. For now, unfortunately, the crisis is not ending. Both sides are poised to escalate the crisis, the war. Russia is doing so despite so many challenges, especially even the challenge of a nuclear blowout, because the fighting is going on also in Chernobyl area, which they now control. And of course, Ukraine just has to react, wants to also make sure that it keeps its territories and gets a coalition of supporters, which is already doing. Unfortunately for the situation too, it hasn't yet got all the critical factors, all the critical military assets that it needs to at least create that balance, which is part of Zelensky's concern at this moment.
Indeed. Ambassador, do you think President Putin greatly underestimated the resolve of President Zelensky? Because if you place both men side by side, you find one is in his 40s, the other is almost an octogenarian. One has had his whole life working in public service, from the KGB to public service and to becoming a president, the FSB, he was a director at a certain point. Do you think that he was taking for granted that possibly President Zelensky would cave in?
Let me put it this way, that President Putin went under quite a number of illusions. First is that he's been doing this, let me use the word intimidating the neighboring countries, Georgia, and even with Ukraine, he had quite succeeded in taking Crimea in 2014. And had also been making inroads into the Donbass region. So it felt it was almost a done deal. I could agree that there would have been some element of his personal perception of the president, but I would put it in a larger scale that he's been getting away with whatever he was doing, and then felt that, well, why not? I mean, this is just this is just the next step, the next obvious step. So he could probably have done it with any other leader in Ukraine. And I think there was also this perception that the rest of the world, especially the rest of Europe, would also would just be accommodating or be recumbent. They will not be reactive to whatever he did, just as happened after Crimea. So another misconception, because what he's seeing now is different from what he would have perceived or thought would be the case.
Okay, and finally, do you also think that President Zelensky, maybe not to say for lack of experience, but that he's also underestimating President Putin and seeking this military solution to this conflict if the peace plan he's proposing does not work? Do you think that the people that will pay for
observation is that Zelensky didn't have any other option. Didn't have any other option and still doesn't have any other option but to fight and protect his country. So we wouldn't say he wasn't worried about or he wouldn't like to walk along with a peace arrangement, but what sort of peace arrangement would he be managing if he still has the fear of Russia chomping up parts of the territory of Ukraine? That wouldn't make sense to anybody. So I would say that it's still, as I probably had mentioned earlier, that this is an existential issue and he just has to fight. His challenge is, how would he manage to fight such a big country that has an overwhelming resources, appears to have overwhelming resources, that he would need help here and there, yes, which he's getting. And as long as he's getting it, he would still try to make sure that he secures as much territory of Ukraine as is possible.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your contribution this morning, Ambassador Joseph Ayalugu, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva, who joined us virtually from London. Thank you for being a part of the program this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
After the break, Ukraine accuses Russia of once again blocking the Black Sea grain export deal. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's Ministry of Renovation and Infrastructure said the UN-brokered Black Sea grain export deal had been halted again because Russia had blocked registration of ships to all Ukrainian ports. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric says Russia had informed officials overseeing the initiative that Moscow would limit registrations on the port in Odessa until all parties agree to unblock the transit of Russian ammonia. The United Nations and Turkey brokered the Black Sea Grain Initiative between Moscow and Kyiv last July to help tackle a global food crisis aggravated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a leading global grain exporter.
We are concerned about the continuous slowdown of the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative, observed particularly in the month of April and May. In May, 33 vessels departed Ukrainian ports, half of the number compared to the previous month of April. Only 3 of those ships departed from the ports of Yuzhny Pivzdeny, one of the 3 Ukrainian ports covered under the agreement. Exports in May reached 1.3 million metric tons of grains and other foodstuff. That's less than half of the previous months. The Russian Federation has informed the JCC of its decision to limit registrations to the port of Yuzhny Pivzdeny as long as ammonia is not exported, and currently it's not. Since May 24th, the number of inspection teams at the JCC has been reduced from 3 to 2. The limited registrations and reduced inspection teams contributed to the drop of the average daily inspection rate down to 3. This is a very serious situation. We need to move forward. The initiative is bound for renewal on 17 July. Global hunger hotspots are increasing, as we've been notifying you on a regular basis, and the specter of food inflation and market volatility lurks in all countries. Our fear, as outlined in what I said, is to see a spike in global food prices, to see volatility. I mean, we saw the positive impact on the monthly food index once the initiative was signed and working, and now things are slowing down.
The Canadian Foreign Ministry has said Canada is imposing sanctions on Moldovan oligarchs, business people, and politicians over their connections to Russia and to prevent alleged Russian destabilization efforts in the region. The sanctions were announced as European leaders are meeting in Moldova in a show of support for the former Soviet Republic, which has denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Since the start of the Russian invasion in Ukraine in February 2022, Canada has imposed sanctions on more than 1,900 individuals and entities. Now let's talk to Mr. Olushayi Adeama, public affairs analyst, who joins us virtually from Lagos here, southwest Nigeria. Good to have you with us this morning.
Olumide, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, let's begin with Moldova, who are saying that they need, they crave, and have applied for NATO membership, along with the membership of Sweden, which has not yet been approved because of Turkey's disapproval. How much of these nations wanting to join NATO continues to be a thorn in the flesh of Russia?
Okay, every European that gathers together, particularly NATO, is a thorn in the flesh of Russia. The truth of the matter is Russia does not want that alliance. As far as Russia is concerned, it is better that they're disunited, that they operate in silo, that they operate individually. By so doing, they're easy to deal with. They can engage with them better. They can take them on if they need to take them on. So they coming together under the umbrella of NATO is something that Russia would, always oppose to. So truth of the matter is, it's not something that Russia is comfortable with.
While women mothers in Russia, in Ukraine, were trying to celebrate their Children's Day, or about to celebrate their Children's Day, a mother turned out to be mourning a child that was lost because of this conflict. Now, as I posed to our previous guest, I will ask the same of you. now that these casualties continue, and now that this conflict has entered its 15th month, do you think that both sides will have an epiphany that we have to look for a way, some middle ground, so that these casualties can stop and so that the war can stop?
That is what I've said severally on this program, that's our hope and desire that at some point they will get tired and they would allow us. Because, like I said before, what they are doing, the war, is affecting the whole world, negatively from all sides. For instance, as a country, Nigeria, we have a new government, we have all sort of problems on our hands. We don't want to start dealing with, food crisis. So as long as this war continues, at some point we'll have food crisis. So one is not happy that a mother is mourning a child at a time like this. What we expect is that all mothers all over the world will celebrate their children like we did ours, and be happy. But it's unfortunate, like you can see in the images you're showing to to everyone, that children are being led into bunkers. They're living a life, more on the run. They don't have a settled home. They don't have a settled life. They cannot really plan for their future. They don't know what tomorrow holds. And this is definitely not a situation that anyone in the world will want or wish for themselves or onto others. So it's a situation that we all hope and pray that would leave or, be dealt with, and we can go, we can turn the page and go to a better time for the rest of the world. So apart from affecting these two major actors in this war, is affecting all of us, and we wish it to go away as soon as possible.
The Brics meeting in South Africa in Cape Town couldn't have held at a more controversial time because of the Russian invasion. China, Brazil, India, South Africa as well, are meeting in the specter of this conflict. Now, we were speaking to our correspondent in Cape Town yesterday, and there was much ado about whether or not President Putin would personally attend. I personally didn't think he would. It doesn't appear that that's going to happen. But this BRICS meeting and the fact that Russia is such a principal actor in BRICS, do you think that it affects that whole union and it'll overshadow everything they're trying to do? Or is this the new world order that people are fearing?
I think I should just go with the fact that you alluded that it's the new world order that people are fearing. We would have situations where even the major actors would sometimes attend some of those meetings virtually or be absent in those meetings because it is the new world order. Things will be done in a way that was never done. And again, maybe I should take this opportunity to just also speak to the fact that a lot of us in Africa feels that South Africa is being overly careful. But the truth of the matter is, whether you like it or not, this war will be over. They have an alliance, they have a business deal, they have a relationship that they must manage. Yes, one would have expected or wish they could do it, in a way that will not make them look like they are outrightly supporting Russia. But the truth of the matter is, some of these alliances have been built over the years, and you don't just, use, the wink of the hand to say, oh, you're no longer, part of an alliance or an agreement that you have signed on to and all of that, So the truth of the matter is, the world order has come upon us. Things that were never acceptable, were never doable, are now being done. And any country or any people who do not realize that and be ready to think on their feet so that whatever comes our way, we're able to manage it in a way that will be most beneficial to our people, then those people are the ones that are living in a fool's paradise.
Since we're on the subject of that location in Africa, would you like to see a more vocal, a more present voice from Nigeria concerning this conflict. We've had some of our esteemed analysts on this program criticize the fact that they think that Nigeria is not doing as well as it can and not speaking up as much as it should, and relinquishing its position on the African continent leadership-wise concerning this conflict. Now that we have a new administration, sorry.
I understand you. If I say that I'm happy with the way we have allowed the world to treat us concerning our leadership in Africa, I will be lying. It is clear, very, very rightly said, that we've become very quiet. We've become invisible. People are beginning not to feel the reason to consult us on very critical matters like this. It seems like our voices, like it used to be, is no longer being heard. We are no longer as relevant as we used to be. And that, for me, is a wake-up call for the new administration. And that is not something you get to attain overnight. There's a lot of work to be done. People must see you as being ready to do, first of all, what you need to do back home, show leadership home, and be ready to take up the leadership on continental level. But the truth of the matter is we can deceive ourselves as much as we can. We definitely are not occupying that leadership that we used to occupy because, clearly, we have not been heard. Nobody's talking to us about Ukraine and Russia. We have not said anything as a nation. And that is really, really something that we should not allow to continue. Because truth of the matter is, in the benevolence of God, and maybe some of the things we mistakenly do or did well in the past, we were occupying the leadership role in Africa. And it is clear, don't let's kid ourselves that we're not occupying that role again. We're not sitting on that seat again. Nobody is asking us any question. That's the truth. And it's unfortunate. I pray that the new government would understand that and take it upon themselves to do whatever they need to do so that we can rightfully occupy the leadership role that we have always occupied. We have everything that it would take for us to reclaim our seat, but we need to take the step. We need to take the deliberate step to take that seat, or else they will continue to treat us the way they're treating us. And at some point, if there's a need, they would run over us if there's a need.
More to that point, sir, even concerning the war in Sudan, the conflict in Sudan, time was that Nigeria will have played a more active role in trying to talk to both armies, the Sudanese army and the other liberation army?
Yeah, yes, you have situations where you have some of our leaders being called in to mediate and individually, but that is not Nigeria. That is not the Nigeria you and I know. The Nigeria you and I know are the leaders, the true leaders of Africa. But unfortunately, truth is, right now, as it stands today, we're not occupying that seat. And that is unfortunate. Because you see, the thing is, when you are old, you're old. When you're the elder, you are the elder in the house. When it comes to a point when your juniors are speaking over your head, you need to recheck yourself and reevaluate what is happening to you, because it is abnormal. It is not right, because you cannot all of a sudden become the junior when you are the elder. And that is critical. A lot of people must understand that with age comes responsibility, with stature, with growth, with development, with all the things we have. The Nigeria that we were comes a lot of responsibility. And so it's not just internal quarrels, internal wranglings, election, and all of that we are dealing with. There's a lot of things to deal with as Nigeria. And that you have pointed to a very, very cogent point that all of a sudden we were so engrossed, overwhelmed with what is happening on the inside, that we're beginning to forget that we also have a role, a very critical and pivotal role to play in Africa.
Plenty of food for thought. Thank you so much for your analysis, Mr. Olushayi Adeama, who joined us virtually from Lagos. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
After the break, Brics foreign ministers meet in Cape Town, South Africa, ahead of August parley, confirm support for multilateralism. Details after the break. Please join us again. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Here in Africa, at a conference of foreign ministers in Cape Town, South Africa, the Brics members reaffirmed their commitment to multilateralism. The event, which is being hosted by South Africa's Minister of International Relations, Naledi Pandor, serves as a preparation for the August summit, which will take place in Johannesburg amidst the political conundrum of Russian President Vladimir Putin's possible attendance. The foreign affairs ministers of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are also considering applications from several Asian, Middle Eastern, and African countries to join the bloc of developing nations. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Semosa, reports.
This year, South Africa assumes the chair of Brics and will host regional and international leaders during the 15th summit of the grouping in August.
South Africa is the current chair of Brics, and we have agreed to focus on Brics and Africa as the key thematic area, focused on accelerating partnerships between Africa and the Brics countries.
Brics ministers also spoke about the expansion of the bloc.
Brics is a different structure. It's a new organization based on the principles of equality, mutual respect, consensus, non-interference, and strict adherence to the United Nations Charter.
There are many aspects of it. One part of it is actually to consolidate how the existing BRICS members are working with each other. The second part of it is how the BRICS engages non-BRICS countries. And the third part of it is how we look at potential expansion.
31.5% of the world GDP is produced by the 5 countries of BRICS, countries which also have 40% of the world population. So it's a very important asset. And we are working. This is maybe why of this big success that it's attracted.
This does discuss the current geopolitical environment, its impact on emerging markets.
First, be independent. Emerging markets and developing countries should manage their own affairs, and these affairs are up to ourselves. No one else has the right to lecture us, take away our right to follow a path that suits our own national conditions.
Another long-standing issue that Minister Naledi Pandor emphasized relate to the ICC warrant of arrest for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The South African government is currently looking at what the various legal options are with respect to this matter. And I have indicated that it is something I believe the President would be the best person to speak about once they have reached a conclusion.
While BRICS ministers are in closed doors deliberating on different issues outside, Ukrainians are protesting, registering their dissatisfaction. They say that they do not want to see President Putin in South Africa.
Why International Criminal Court provided this warrant of arrest specifically for that? So what Russia is doing, they are forcefully separating children from their parents. They are providing Russian citizenship and changing personal data of those children. So this is absolutely illegal, and we hope that South Africa will stand with Ukraine on children's rights.
South Africa still advocates for a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, says that they are totally opposed to the unilateral sanctions as they tend to have far-reaching implications. From Cape Town, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channel Television News.
And as the BRICS meeting holds in Cape Town in South Africa, we'd like to discover just why the South African currency, the rand, is dropping. To help us make sense of that is Ini John Mekwa, Channel's business correspondent. South Africa hasn't had the best of times with the energy crisis, but now with the rand dropping,
yes,
does that have to do specifically with their position with Russia?
It seems like because we know that the possibility of a secondary sanction has been hanging over South Africa for a bit now. I think about a month ago, we had the United States accusing them of supplying weapons to Russia. We do know that there's a close tie between Russia and South Africa. In fact, it's supposed to be the reverse, where Russia, gives them arms, ammunition, and all of that. But U.S. had accused them, the other way.
Yes.
Apparently, they actually do have a close trading relationship, that's Russia and the United States. And now with the President, Ramaphosa, being the chair of Brics at this time, very sensitive time to be heading the controversial Brics, because you want to maintain, as a country, especially a country in Africa, you want to maintain a good relationship with the West, but you also need Russia, because Russia has a lot of developed resources which is being exported to a lot of countries. Now, we've seen, since the war started, I think we've seen the rand drop about 20% or so, but it's been very bad between last week and this week, getting close to this foreign ministers meeting, because the summit itself is in August. And then with this meeting starting yesterday and ending today, yesterday we saw it hit a new low, about 20 rand for $1. Even though it recovered a bit later, but that was just about 19 now, 19 rand for $1. And all because investors are selling off. They're selling off their investments in bonds. They're selling off in stocks, and so the currency is losing value because people don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. If the U.S. decides to implement that secondary sanction on South Africa because of this, especially because, they are saying that you cannot tell us how we're going to run our lives or run our countries or our economy if we want to have an alternative to the dollar, if we want to have an alternative to SWIFT, which are some of the things they're talking about. Yesterday, when you spoke to Innocent, he also talked about the fact that they want to have an alternative to the rating agencies, which will see, they can send a country's bond flying, out of the window and all of that. So it's a sensitive one for South Africa, and that's why somewhere around the corner we hear, are they going to give in to pressure and move the hosting to China? That is also one of the... So we can safely
say that South Africa, though supporting Russia, does not want to rub the United States the wrong way.
Well, I don't think anybody wants to rub an economic giant the wrong way.
Chinese airlines are avoiding flying over Russian airspace. That's not too surprising.
It's not, but it's not. But it seems there's been some kind of approval. You understand? And the other way it's working. So going from Russia is working, but going from the in and out of the United States through the Russian air is what the Chinese airlines do not want to do. I don't know. Maybe once they see anything that has to do with the United States, something might happen. So they're just being careful.
Thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
More from Ini John Mekwa on Business Morning. After this program, please stay with us for that. Finally, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States will open a diplomatic station in the Norwegian Arctic town of Tromsø. According to speaking to reporters after a two-day meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Oslo, Mr. Blinken said in his words, to deepen our own engagement in the High North, I am announcing today the United States will be opening an American presence post in Tromsø. For the U.S., the presence post is really an ability to have a diplomatic footprint above the Arctic Circle. Mr. Blinken's announcement comes just after Norway took over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council. The council comprises 8 Arctic states of Russia, the United States, Canada, Finland, Norway, Iceland, Sweden, and Denmark. That's where we call it a day for this special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend, and please join us again next week.